I always thought I understood love, the kind that makes you give up everything, your pride, your dreams, your peace, just to see someone else happy. For me, that person was my son, Michael. From the day he was born, he became my entire world. After my husband passed away, I built everything around him. The mansion, the business, the fortune. All of it was meant to be his one day. And then came Clara. The moment she stepped into our lives, everything started to change. I still remember the first dinner I hosted for her. She walked in wearing a silk dress the color of champagne, a calculated smile painted across her perfect face. I could tell immediately. She wasn't nervous or shy like most young women meeting their boyfriend's mother. She was assessing me, like a buyer inspecting property, and unfortunately for me, she saw value. Michael was in love, hopelessly, blindingly in love. I told myself to be patient, to give her a chance. Maybe I was imagining her coldness. Maybe I was being too protective. But deep down, I knew the moment she took his hand and looked at me with that polite little smirk, I was no longer the center of my son's world. After the wedding, everything began to crumble piece by piece. Clara moved into my house, and within weeks, she started redecorating everything. The soft ivory walls I had chosen with such care were painted over with sterile grays. My late husband's portraits disappeared from the hallways, replaced by abstract paintings that matched her designer furniture. Every corner of my home, every piece of my history, slowly vanished under her influence. But what hurt most wasn't the decor. It was Michael. He stopped coming to breakfast with me. He no longer asked for my advice about the company. Even our evening tea, the one ritual that had survived years of loss and success, was gone. Whenever I tried to talk to him, Clara would appear from nowhere, slip her arm around him, and say, "Michael, darling, your mother must be tired. Let's not stress her with business talk." I wasn't tired. I was being erased. At first, I stayed quiet. I told myself I was being dramatic, that I needed to let him live his life. But then small things began to happen. My jewelry missing, important letters, accidentally, misplaced, the staff suddenly quitting without notice. Clara smiled through it all, playing the perfect wife, while quietly twisting the knife. The day she suggested moving me into the guest house, she said it so sweetly I almost didn't realize the insult. "Evelyn, you'd be more comfortable there. It's quieter and you'll have your privacy." My privacy? No. What she wanted was distance, to move me out of my own home, one step closer to disappearing completely. I refused, of course. That night Michael and I had our first real fight. I can still hear his voice, sharp and unfamiliar. "Mom, you're making things difficult for Clara. She's just trying to help. Why can't you trust her?" It was like a stranger was yelling at me, my boy, the one I raised with love, the one who used to bring me tea on rainy days, was now defending her, his tone cold and distant. When he left the room, I sat alone in the dark, surrounded by silence. And for the first time in my life I felt old. Not because of age, but because I realized how invisible I had become in my own home. Weeks passed, and I watched as Clara tightened her hold. She began attending company meetings in my place, making suggestions that Michael treated like commands. I overheard her once on the phone. She thought I was asleep, saying, "Once everything is transferred, we'll finally have peace transferred." That word echoed in my head. What exactly did she plan to transfer? My company, my home, my son's loyalty? I decided to find out the next morning. I dressed in my soft cream blouse and diamond earrings, the ones my husband gifted me for our 25th anniversary, and walked into Michael's office unannounced. Clara was there, seated at his desk, flipping through property papers. When she saw me, her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Evelyn," she said smoothly, "we were just talking about you." "How kind," I replied. "What's this about transferring ownership of the estate?" Michael looked startled. Clara, however, stayed perfectly composed. "Oh, that," she said, feigning innocence. "It's just a precaution, you know, to make sure everything is in Michael's name in case something happens to you." Something happens to me. Her words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through the dark halls of my mansion, once so warm and full of laughter, now cold and quiet like a museum. As I reached the window overlooking the garden, I saw Clara standing outside on the phone again. Her voice was low, but the wind carried enough for me to hear. "Yes, once the papers are signed, she won't be a problem anymore." My hands trembled. The air seemed to freeze around me. It wasn't paranoia anymore. Clara wasn't just trying to push me aside. She wanted me gone. That was the night I decided I wouldn't let her win. I had built this empire with my own hands. No gold-digging woman was going to strip it away from me. If Clara wanted a war, she would have won. I went back to my room, poured myself a glass of wine, and looked at my reflection in the mirror. For the first time in years, I didn't see a grieving widow or a fragile mother. I saw a woman who had survived loss, betrayal, and loneliness, and was still standing. A slow smile curved on my lips as I whispered to my reflection, "You have no idea who you're dealing with, Clara." Because if she thought she could destroy me quietly, she was about to learn that revenge, when served by a woman like me, would be anything but quiet. I woke up the next morning calmer than I had in weeks. It's strange how anger, once it settles, can become a kind of power. I no longer felt helpless. I felt deliberate. Clara thought she was playing a clever game, manipulating Michael, isolating me, weaving her little web around the fortune I had built, but she underestimated the woman she was up against. I'd built companies from the ground up, negotiated with men twice my age, survived the loss of a husband and a lifetime of betrayal. I had learned long ago that the best revenge isn't loud. It's quiet, patient, and perfectly timed, so I began watching, listening, waiting. At breakfast, Clara smiled at me across the table, pretending nothing was wrong. She looked radiant in her silk robe, her diamond earrings glinting under the morning light. Michael sat beside her, distracted by his phone. Occasionally nodding at something, she whispered to him. They looked like the perfect couple, the golden son and his flawless wife. But I saw the truth beneath it. The tension in Michael's shoulders, the way Clara's fingers tightened slightly whenever he disagreed with her. Their perfection was performance, and every act eventually falls apart. After they left for the day, I called in the only person I could still trust. Robert, my late husband's lawyer. He'd known our family for decades and had always been loyal to me. When he arrived, I didn't bother with small talk. "Robert," I said, pouring him tea, "I need to know what Clara's been doing with Michael's signature." His brows furrowed, as she'd been accessing company documents. "She's been in his office nearly every day. I want everything checked, transfers, authorizations, anything with my name or the estate's title." He nodded gravely. "I'll start immediately. And Evelyn, be careful. If she's really after control, she won't stop at paperwork." That warning stayed with me. Over the next week, I maintained the act. The gracious, aging mother trying to adjust to her son's new wife. I complimented Clara's redecorating, attended her charity luncheons, even allowed her to accompany me to the spa she loved so much. She believed I was surrendering, softening. But in truth, I was memorizing her patterns. She always carried 2 phones. One she used around Michael, and another she kept hidden in her designer purse. She was obsessed with appearances. Everything had to look perfect, and she often disappeared into the garden to make private calls. So I followed her. One afternoon, while she stood near the fountain whispering into her phone, I stayed hidden behind the hedge, close enough to catch fragments of her conversation. "Yes, the transfer's almost ready. She's just waiting for the final signature. No, she doesn't suspect a thing." She laughed softly, that same honey, sweet laugh she used to charm everyone around her. Then she added, "Once it's done, we'll liquidate and leave this miserable house behind." My chest tightened, so she wasn't working alone. There was someone else. When she walked away, I stepped out from behind the hedge, every nerve in my body buzzing. The game had just changed, and I intended to find out who her partner was. That night, I went to Michael's study under the pretense of bringing him coffee. Clara wasn't around. I took the chance to glance at his desk, and that's when I saw it. An open file labeled E. Whitmore Estate Transfer. My name, my estate, my life. The document was halfway signed, with only my approval missing. They had forged some of my older documents, even used a duplicate of my signature on a few pages. My blood ran cold. When I heard footsteps in the hallway, I quickly tucked the file under a stack of papers and forced a smile as Clara entered the room. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, pretending surprise. "No," I said evenly, pouring myself a drink. "Just wanted to check on Michael's work. He's been busy." She gave a little shrug, her tone dripping with false humility. "He's doing his best. You know how stressful it is managing all this money. I'm just trying to help him." "Of course," I said softly. "You're a very helpful woman, Clara." Her eyes flickered for just a second, enough for me to see that she heard the steel beneath my words. Later in my bedroom, I stared out the window as rain tapped against the glass. I realized that exposing her wasn't enough. No, that would be too easy. Clara needed to lose everything the way she made me lose, slowly, painfully, piece by piece. So I set the first trap. The next morning, I invited her for a private brunch in the garden. She looked suspicious but curious. A woman like Clara couldn't resist the opportunity to gloat. "I've been thinking," I told her as we sat under the oak tree. "You've been handling things so well lately. Maybe it's time I step back and let you manage more." Her eyes sparkled with greed. "Evelyn, that's so generous of you." "Yes," I continued smoothly. "I've decided to sign over temporary management rights for a few assets, just to see how you handle them." She leaned forward, barely hiding her excitement. "That's wonderful. I'll prepare the paperwork." I smiled, pretending to sip my tea. "Already done. Robert will meet you tomorrow at the office to finalize everything." She froze for half a second before recovering. "Of course," she said sweetly. "I'll be there." What she didn't know was that Robert was already in on my plan. The papers she would sign the next day weren't transfers of ownership. They were legally binding statements acknowledging her access to company funds and her role in several unauthorized financial actions. In short, a trap dressed as a gift. That night, as I watched the lights dim across the estate, I allowed myself a rare smile. For the first time in months, I felt in control again. But my satisfaction didn't last long. Later that evening, I heard Michael and Clara arguing in their room. His voice was louder than usual. "You promised me, Clara. You said this would help us, not divide us." Then came her reply, sharp, venomous. "I'm doing this for us?" "Your mother's manipulating you, can't you see that?" I leaned against the wall outside their door, my heart pounding. My son was starting to see through her lies, and that terrified her. When their voices finally faded, I walked back to my room, my resolve turning to steel. Tomorrow would be the beginning of her undoing. But what I didn't know then was that Clara, desperate and cornered, had already set her own plan in motion, and by the next evening, one of us would nearly lose everything. The morning of the meeting, I woke before dawn. My nerves hummed with quiet anticipation as I watched the first pale streaks of sunlight wash over the gardens. Everything was in motion. Robert had prepared the documents, the legal team was ready, and all that remained was for Clara to sign. I dressed carefully, choosing a soft pearl-colored suit and my late husband's diamond brooch. It wasn't vanity, it was armor. I wanted to look composed, unshaken, unbreakable. When Clara arrived at the office later that morning, she carried herself with her usual confidence. Her perfume lingered in the air, expensive and cloying, like everything about her. "Good morning, Evelyn," she said sweetly. "Michael told me you had some papers for me." "Les," I said, gesturing to the table. "Just a formality, dear. Robert will walk you through it." She smiled that same serpent smile and sat down. As Robert explained the terms, she nodded politely, pretending to understand, her pen poised elegantly between her fingers. She didn't notice that every signature she placed tied her a little tighter to her own downfall. By the time we finished, she looked radiant. "Well," she said, standing, "I suppose I'm officially part of the family business now." "Yes," I murmured, watching her leave. "You certainly are." The moment she stepped out, Robert turned to me. "It's done. Once we file these, she's legally acknowledged mismanagement of assets. If she tries anything now, she'll hang herself with her own words." For the first time in months, I exhaled. I thought the nightmare was finally over. But Clara was too cunning to fall quietly. That evening, when Michael came home, his face was pale, his expression unreadable. I was arranging flowers in the sitting room when he entered, holding a folder in his hands. "Mother," he said flatly, "we need to talk." The tone alone sent a chill through me. "Of course, darling. What is it?" He dropped the folder onto the coffee table. Inside were photographs. Of me, sitting with Robert at the club, at the office, even at dinner. Private meetings taken from a distance, grainy but clear enough. "What is this supposed to mean?" I asked carefully. "Clara got these from one of the staff," he said. "She says you and Robert are planning to move assets out of my name. That you forged documents to trap her." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was brilliant, cruelly, devastatingly brilliant. She had flipped my plan on its head. "Michael," I said quietly, "listen to me. Clara is lying. She's been manipulating you since the day she arrived." He cut me off. "'Nuff, Mother!" I'm tired of you always blaming her. She's trying to protect me from you." His words hit harder than I expected. "Protect you," I whispered. "From me." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "She showed me the documents you had her sign. She says you tricked her, that you're trying to ruin our marriage." I stared at him, heart pounding, realizing how deeply she'd gotten inside his head. "Michael, those papers were for her protection. She's been plotting to take everything from you." But he wasn't listening anymore. He turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. I sank into the chair, my hands trembling. For the first time in years, I felt real fear. Not of losing my wealth, but of losing my son completely. That night the house was silent. I could hear faint footsteps upstairs, muffled voices. Clara soothing him, spinning her web tighter with every word. I knew I had to act fast before she destroyed whatever bond we had left. The next morning, I went to his office again, hoping to reason with him. But when I entered, he wasn't alone. Clara was sitting behind his desk, legs crossed, sipping coffee like she owned the place. "Good morning, Evelyn," she said pleasantly. "I was just helping Michael review some legal documents. He's transferring management of the estate to me temporarily. Isn't that thoughtful?" My blood ran cold. "Michael, you can't be serious." He looked at me tiredly. "It's just for a few months. Clara's better at handling the staff. You've been under too much stress lately." Too much stress. That was her doing, her whispering poison into his ear until he saw me as the problem. "Michael, please," I said softly. "You don't understand what she's doing." "Enough," he said sharply. "I've made my decision." Clara smiled faintly, placing her hand over his. "Don't worry, Evelyn. I'll take care of everything." That moment, that casual, victorious look on her face, burned into my memory. I walked out of the office, my heels clicking against the marble floor, my mind racing. She had won this round, but not the war. I spent the rest of the day in my study, going through old files, property deeds, anything that could help me. That's when I found something. An old trust my husband had created years ago, one that bypassed standard inheritance. It was hidden deep within the archives, nearly forgotten. The clause stated that the family estate could only legally belong to the bloodline, meaning no spouse could ever hold ownership or control, no matter what the transfer documents said. My husband had built a safeguard I'd never realized still existed. I felt tears sting my eyes. For the first time, the ghosts of the past felt like allies. But if I wanted to use it, I needed evidence. Proof of Clara's deceit, not just suspicion. That meant baiting her one more time. So I called her. "Clara, dear, I'd like to apologize," I said sweetly. "Perhaps I overstepped. Let's have dinner tonight. Just us two. I'll make your favorite." There was a pause before she replied, her voice wary but intrigued. "All right, Evelyn, let's put this behind us." That night, I prepared everything myself. The candles, the wine, the perfect table setting. When she arrived, she looked radiant in red, the color of victory. "I must say, I wasn't expecting this," she said, settling into her chair. I smiled. "Well, we're family, aren't we? No point holding grudges." As we dined, I steered the conversation carefully, letting her talk, watching her confidence grow. I poured her another glass of wine, and soon her guard began to slip. "You know," she said, swirling her drink, "you made this much harder than it needed to be. I was planning to let you stay here after everything transferred." I raised an eyebrow. "Were you?" She smirked. "Of course. But now, after what you tried to pull with Robert, I don't think that's possible." I leaned forward, my voice calm and cool. "So it was never about love, was it, Clara? Just power?" She tilted her head, unbothered. "Love is for fools, Evelyn. Power lasts longer." I smiled faintly, because that was all I needed. Every word was being recorded on the small device hidden beneath the tablecloth. The trap had just reset, and this time I was ready to spring it. What I didn't know, however, was that before the night was over, someone else would discover the recording and use it in a way I could never have imagined. I slept soundly that night for the first time in months. Maybe it was the wine, maybe it was victory. Either way, I felt lighter, as if the weight of Clara's poison had finally started to lift from my home. The recording was my weapon now. Every word she'd said, every smug confession, was saved safely on that small silver device. I planned to show it to Michael the next morning, to finally tear the blindfold from his eyes. But life, as I've learned, never gives you triumph without a twist. When I woke, the first thing I noticed was silence. Not peaceful, but uneasy. The kind that presses on your skin. The second thing I noticed was that my study door was slightly open. I always locked it. Always. I rushed inside, heart hammering. My desk drawers were open, papers scattered. The recorder. Gone. My knees nearly gave out. I knew instantly who had taken it. I ran downstairs only to find Clara and Michael in the living room. She sat on the sofa, calm as ever, her eyes glittering with malicious satisfaction. Michael stood beside her, the recorder clutched tightly in his hand. "Mother," he said quietly, "Clara found this in your study." "Found? How convenient." "Evelyn," Clara added sweetly, "I was worried when I saw you acting so secretive last night. Imagine my shock when I discovered you've been recording our private conversations." Her voice was the perfect balance of hurt and innocence. I could have almost applauded her performance if it weren't destroying me. "Michael," I said firmly, "listen to me. That recording proves she's been lying to you. She admitted everything." He interrupted, his voice cold. "Admitted what?" "That you've been trying to destroy her since the day she married me." He pressed play. The sound of my voice filled the room first, calm, measured, saying, "So it was never about love, was it, Clara?" Then Clara's reply followed. "Love is for fools, Evelyn. Power lasts longer." But right before that moment, something had been cut. I knew that tone. She'd edited it. She'd taken the part where I confronted her, twisted the order of the conversation, and turned it into something else entirely. On the recording, it now sounded like I was the manipulator, like I'd provoked her, trapped her. Michael's face hardened as he stopped the playback. "How could you?" he whispered. "You're trying to ruin my marriage. You've gone too far. Michael, please." He held up a hand. "I think it's best if you leave for a while." "Leave." The word hung in the air like a slap. Clara didn't even hide her smile this time. "It'll be good for you, Evelyn. You deserve a little rest." I wanted to scream, to tell him everything, but the look in his eyes stopped me. It wasn't anger anymore, it was pity, and that hurt more than any accusation. I packed my things in silence. As I walked down the grand staircase with my suitcase, I felt like a ghost, watching someone else's life crumble. Clara stood by the door, her arms folded victorious. "Take care of yourself," she said softly, leaning in. "You always wanted peace, didn't you? Now you'll finally have it, far away from here." I didn't answer. I just stared at her, memorizing that smug expression, that glint of triumph. Because one day, I knew I'd see it again. But next time it would be her walking away. I left the estate that afternoon, driving to the old lake house I hadn't visited in years. It was quiet there, too quiet. Dust covered the furniture, and the scent of the past hung heavy in every room. I poured myself a drink and sat by the window, staring at the rippling water. For days, I didn't move much. I replayed everything in my mind, the dinners, the arguments, the lies. I wondered how I could have missed the signs, how my own son could turn against me so completely. But grief has a strange way of sharpening the mind. Once the pain dulled, clarity came. I realized something crucial. Clara wasn't clever. She was reckless. Editing the recording meant she'd left traces. The audio file had metadata. If I could access the original device or any backup she made, I could prove the manipulation. And I knew exactly who could help. My husband's old business partner, a tech expert named Gregory. He'd retired years ago, but he owed me favors. When I called him, his voice cracked with surprise. "Evelyn, it's been ages." "I need your help," I said simply. He didn't ask questions. He just agreed to meet me. A few days later, we sat in his workshop, surrounded by old monitors and humming servers. I handed him the recorder, which I'd managed to recover from Michael's office after the staff informed me Clara had left it behind. Her arrogance was her weakness. She thought the war was over. Gregory worked in silence for hours. Finally, he looked up, eyes wide. "Evelyn, someone tampered with this file. Spliced it, rearranged segments. It's definitely been edited." I smiled faintly. "Can you restore the original?" He nodded. "It'll take some time, but yes." That was all I needed to hear. Over the next few weeks, I rebuilt myself. Gone was the fragile widow who had let grief turn her soft. I became sharper, colder, deliberate. I began contacting old allies, people Clara didn't even know existed. Investors, lawyers, friends from the board. Quietly, I started to reposition my influence. While Clara flaunted her new power, I was reclaiming the empire from the shadows. One evening, while reviewing some property ledgers, I came across something unexpected: large withdrawals from the estate account. Dates, amounts, and signatures all pointed to Clara. She was funneling money into an offshore account under a false name. I felt a dark satisfaction bloom inside me. Perfect. The next day Gregory called. The files restored. You were right. She cut nearly 40 seconds, including her confession about the transfer and that line about aunts. She's gone. It's all here. I didn't say a word. I just closed my eyes and let the calm wash over me. That night, I sat alone at the lake house with a glass of wine, staring into the fire. Clara thought she'd buried me, but all she'd done was teach me how to strike without mercy. She had taken my son, my name, my home. But I still had something far more dangerous, the truth. And truth, when wielded by a woman like me, doesn't just destroy reputations, it destroys lives. I whispered to the flames, you wanted war, Clara. Now you'll have it. The next morning I woke before sunrise. The sky outside my lake house was painted in shades of silver and rose, calm and cold, the kind of beauty that hides danger underneath. For weeks Clara had played her games unchecked. But now the board was mine. I called Gregory again. Can you make a copy of the restored recording? Already done, he said. One for you, one encrypted on my server. What are you planning? Evelyn, redemption, I replied and hung up. My first step was quiet infiltration. I had spent decades building the Harrington estate. Every relationship, every investment, every trusted name tied back to me. Clara might have stolen my place, but she had no roots in that soil. And roots, when tugged the right way, can make everything collapse. I called Miriam, my late husband's former secretary, a woman whose loyalty was as solid as marble. Miriam, dear, how are things at the office? I asked lightly. Chaotic. She sighed. Clara's been changing staff, cutting budgets, making strange decisions. Why do you ask? Because I need a favor, quietly. I want every financial record from the past 6 months, especially anything under Clara's signature. There was a pause, then a soft chuckle. I always knew you'd come back, Mrs. Harrington. By nightfall, I had access to everything. Dozens of transactions traced a clear trail. Clara had been transferring estate funds into a shell company registered under her maiden name. The evidence was irrefutable. But revenge isn't just about proof. It's about timing. I needed Michael to see her mask fall. Not to be told, but to witness it himself. So I called him. My voice was steady, calm, almost maternal. Michael, I know things between us are tense, but I'd like to see you, just you, for dinner at the lake house. No arguments, I promise. He hesitated, then sighed. All right, Mother. One dinner. That night, I cooked his favorite meal, rosemary chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, and red wine. The same meal I'd made when he graduated college. I wanted it to feel familiar. A place his heart remembered, before Clara's poison tainted everything. He arrived just after 8, looking tired, older than his years. Clara had drained him more than he realized. I wasn't sure you'd actually come, I said softly. He smiled faintly. Neither was I. We ate in near silence. Then I placed the restored recorder on the table. Before dessert, I said, I want you to listen to something. He frowned. Mother, please. Just once. No interruptions. I pressed play. This time the full, unedited version filled the room. Clara's voice was clear, cold, dripping with venom. Michael's blind. Once the assets are transferred, we'll convince him his mother's unstable. By the time he realizes, it'll be too late. Michael froze. The glass in his hand trembled. Then came my voice, the real part Clara had cut out. If you hurt him, I will destroy you. Silence. He stared at the recorder as if it had turned to fire. Shush, she said that. She did. I whispered. And she edited the recording to make me look like a monster. He pushed his chair back, his face pale. I need to go. Michael, I said gently, whatever you do next, do it quietly. Don't confront her yet. She's dangerous when cornered. He nodded absently and left, his car tires spinning gravel as he drove away into the night. I stood by the window long after he was gone. My reflection in the glass looked different now. Sharper, stronger. I wasn't the grieving widow anymore. I was a woman reborn in the ashes of betrayal. The next day, word spread through the estate's inner circle. Clara had suddenly withdrawn half of the company's operational funds, claiming an urgent overseas investment. Miriam leaked the documents discreetly to the press, anonymous sources, of course. Within 48 hours, a scandal erupted. Headlines bloomed like wildfire. Harrington Estate's new mistress under financial scrutiny. Suspicious transfers linked to family accounts. And then, the final blow. I anonymously submitted the unedited recording to the media. It aired late one evening on a major business network, played in full. I watched it from the comfort of my lake house, sipping wine. Clara's voice echoed through the TV speakers, her every deceit broadcast to millions. By morning, the estate was swarming with investigators. Lawyers, journalists, and board members demanded answers. Michael called me just before noon. His voice trembled, a mixture of rage and heartbreak. "She's gone," he said. "Packed a suitcase and disappeared. The staff said she left before dawn." "Good," I replied. "Let her run. The world's already catching up to her." He was silent for a long time. Then softly, "Mother, I'm sorry." I felt my throat tighten, but I stayed composed. "No, Michael, you just learned the hardest lesson. That love can blind even the wisest of us." When he came to the lake house that evening, he looked different. Humble. Broken. He hugged me for the first time in years, the embrace hesitant but real. "I should have believed you," he whispered. "I wouldn't have," I admitted. "Not if I were in your place." She was very convincing. We sat together by the fire, the same way we had when he was a child. Only now, the warmth between us felt fragile, delicate, something rebuilt piece by piece. But I wasn't done yet. Revenge, real revenge, isn't just about justice, it's about restoration. The estate still bore Clara's fingerprints, in staff loyalty, in whispers, in rumors. I had to cleanse it completely, so I returned. The staff greeted me with hesitant smiles, unsure if I was truly back. But when I stepped into that grand foyer, I felt power return to my bones. I ordered the locks changed. I reinstated loyal employees. And in the office where Clara had once sat in triumph, I placed a vase of white lilies, her least favorite flower. That evening I received one final message, an email from Clara. No subject line, no signature, just one sentence. "You think you've won, but you only know half the story." I stared at it for a long time, a faint smile curving my lips. If she was still out there, still watching, good. Let her see what happens when you underestimate a woman who's lost everything once and learned never to lose again. I closed the laptop and whispered to the empty room, "You taught me deceit, Clara." But I mastered it. It had been 3 months since Clara vanished, 3 months of quiet, steady rebuilding, and of waiting. The Harrington estate was mine again. The board reinstated my authority, the staff fell back into their loyal rhythm, and the family reputation was salvaged piece by piece. Yet even as the house filled with warmth again, a shadow lingered. Revenge may restore what was lost, but it never comes without its echo. Sometimes, late at night, I'd catch myself glancing at the door, expecting to see her walk in, that confident smirk carved into her face. But she never did, until one evening she finally did. It was a cold night, rain lashing against the windows. I was sitting in the library, reading by the fire, when the doorbell rang. My butler, Henry, appeared moments later, hesitant. "Madam, there's someone here to see you." When I stepped into the foyer, I froze. Clara stood there, drenched from the rain, her once polished aura shattered. Her makeup was smudged, her eyes wild, and her clothes, expensive but wrinkled, told a story of decline. "Evelyn," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, let me in." I said nothing. I simply turned and walked back toward the library. After a moment, I heard her footsteps follow. She stood before the fire, hugging herself as if to keep from breaking. "I have nowhere else to go," she said softly. Michael froze the accounts. "The media destroyed my name. You won." I studied her quietly, taking in the woman who had once believed she could outplay me. "Why are you here, Clara?" I asked. "Because I know you," she said bitterly. "You won't rest until you see me suffer. So go on, finish it. Turn me in. Humiliate me publicly. Isn't that what you've wanted all along?" Her voice cracked at the edges. For the first time, she wasn't performing. She was begging. I leaned back in my chair, swirling my wine slowly. "You think this was about humiliation?" She frowned, confused. "It was never about destroying you," I continued. "It was about balance. You tilted the scales, Clara." I simply corrected them. Her eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly." I cut in. "You wanted power, and you thought taking my son would give it to you. But power earned through deceit always devours its owner." She stared at me, her lips trembling. "Please, Evelyn." "I'm sorry." I was angry, desperate. I thought if I didn't control everything, I'd lose everything. I let her words hang there, watching them twist in the air like smoke. For a brief moment, I almost felt pity. Almost. "You've already lost everything," I said finally, but not because of me, because you built your life on a lie. She stepped closer, desperation flaring. Then help me, just one chance. I'll leave town, you'll never see me again. I smiled faintly. You won't get another chance, Clara. Not from me. She stared, realizing the truth. Then her face hardened. You're no better than me, she hissed. You pretend to be righteous, but you enjoyed every moment of this. I stood slowly, meeting her gaze. You're wrong, I didn't enjoy it. But I did need it. Because women like us, we don't break quietly, we rebuild. She flinched, and I saw the moment she realized she had no cards left. No charm, no lies, no audience. Leave my house, I said calmly. If you stay another minute, I'll call the police. She hesitated, her mouth opening as if to argue, then closed it again. Without another word, she turned and walked out into the rain. I watched through the window as she disappeared into the darkness, her figure swallowed by the storm. For a long while, I stood there in silence, feeling the last threads of anger and grief unwind inside me. It was over. The next morning, Michael arrived at the estate with breakfast and 2 cups of coffee. Something he hadn't done since he was a teenager. Sleep well? He asked, setting the tray down. I smiled faintly. I did, actually. We ate together in quiet peace, sunlight filtering through the windows. It felt almost unreal. This calm after the chaos. When we finished, he looked at me thoughtfully. I've been thinking, Mother. You've carried this family for so long. Maybe it's time you let someone else handle the business for a while. Take a real rest. Travel, live. I looked around the grand room. The portraits, the polished floors, the echoes of all the battles I'd fought within these walls. And for the first time, I realized he was right. Perhaps I will, I said softly. Later that afternoon, I walked through the garden, my husband's favorite place, and watched the autumn leaves fall around the marble fountain. The air smelled of rain and lavender. Life, in its quiet way, was returning. Miriam met me by the gate, holding a stack of envelopes. Final reports, Mrs. Harrington, she said with a smile. Everything's back under your control. I nodded. Thank you, Miriam, for staying loyal. For she hesitated, then asked, do you think she'll come back? I looked toward the distant road. No, I said. Women like Clara never return to the scene of their own defeat. She'll find another story to write herself into. Somewhere she can pretend to be the victim. Miriam chuckled softly. And you? I'll stay right here, I replied. Where the truth finally belongs. That night, as I sat alone in the study, I opened my journal, the same one I had kept since the day my husband died. I wrote a single line across the page. Revenge is not about anger. It's about remembering who you were before they made you forget. I closed it, placed it on the shelf, and poured myself one last glass of wine. In the firelight, the house seemed alive again, no longer haunted by deceit but reborn in truth. The portrait of my husband hung above the mantel, his kind eyes watching over me as they always had. I raised my glass toward him. To peace, I whispered. Hard-earned, but mine at last. Outside, the storm had passed. The moonlight spilled across the wet garden paths, glistening like silver threads, quiet, eternal, unbroken. And as the clock struck midnight, I allowed myself to finally exhale. My war was over, my home was whole, and the woman who once tried to destroy me had become nothing more than a shadow fading into the night.